It's Saturday, June 13th. Welcome to a freshly squeezed episode of Bazaar. I'm your host Sid, and joining me in the studio today is the one and only Jatin Mehta. Jatin is a science writer whose stories on space exploration have been published on a number of global publications like The Planetary Society, The Wire. So check out his website jatin.space for all things space. This guy is the real deal. It's a pleasure to have you on the show.
Hi Sid, thanks for having me here. Really looking forward to the conversation today.
So the topic for today is space and the privatization of space. As you know, SpaceX recently launched 2 astronauts into space, to International Space Station. It has been buzzing recently. Everyone is really excited about SpaceX and the space industry. And my question to you is that how does the mission to ISS help develop the private sector, and how will this open new opportunities for growth and ultimately lead to the privatization of space?
So one of the most important things about the recent SpaceX launch is that SpaceX launched astronauts on a spacecraft that they built on their own, which is human rated. This is unlike any other event in the past where only governments have been building a human rated spacecraft. So you could take the example of the space shuttle, which is iconic, and in the case of Russia, the Soyuz capsule, all of them are government built. But in this case, this is the first time in history a private spacecraft has sent astronauts to space on a private rocket, no less. So SpaceX carrying NASA astronauts to the International Space Station is very important in that sense. And it has basically kickstarted the era where you can actually imagine private astronauts going to space in the future. So it doesn't have to be, NASA astronauts going to space. You and I, in principle, could take a ticket on board one of these capsules and go to space as well. And this also, in the long term, this goes in line with NASA's plan where they're part of the ISS. So NASA's part of the ISS, they want commercial industries to take over. They want to commercialize the space station end of it as well, wherein you can expect private astronauts to go to the space station as well, and have activities being carried out in space for whatever reason. So SpaceX's milestone development of having a human rated capsule that they can use for sending not just NASA astronauts but also for other purposes is very important in that sense. And the cost part is where it gets really interesting. Per seat cost for sending an astronaut to space is about $55 million compared to the approximately 80 to 90 million that NASA was paying to send a US astronaut on the Soyuz capsule. Of course, there's also the space shuttle, which costed north of $200 million per seat, but that's not a fair comparison because the space shuttle had also had a lot of space for cargo. So, but anyway, the point being that $55 million is not a bad price at all to put an astronaut in space, and it will likely get lowered with time. So that's really something to look forward to.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, as we know, in economics, we have this concept of economies of scale where, the cost gradually comes down, and 55 million is just where SpaceX is getting started. So the road is very optimistic. It's, I think, SpaceX has a long way to go. How was SpaceX able to disrupt the space industry? I mean, it was set up in 2002 and the action started in 2008. So what did SpaceX do in principle to disrupt the space industry?
So the most important point which people keep on raising about SpaceX's disruption is reusability, and that's definitely fair to an extent. However, what one doesn't typically think of is that an orbital class booster coming back from space and after facing the heat of the atmospheric descent, it costs to refurbish the booster. Of course, that's not even close to the cost of building an entire rocket first stage again. However, it is some cost nevertheless. And unless you start doing many reusable launches, which SpaceX is inching towards, definitely, unless you start doing that, until that return doesn't compound. However, the more interesting thing to me is that SpaceX's cost by itself, even for a new Falcon 9 rocket, is lower than what most people have been charging for a similar performance. it's literally almost 5 to 10 times of a difference in some cases. The cost effectiveness starts with the rocket itself, and the reusability just adds a cherry on top of it. And then there's the other part, which is the cadence. The launch cadence of SpaceX is really high, and that's something that's not often as remarked. So, for example, in this year alone, despite the coronavirus pandemic situation we are in, SpaceX has already launched like 9 times. And and I remember in the past year or two, it launched twice in a week. And there are airlines which run at a lower frequency than that. So that's something to think about. And this match of higher launch cadence with very effective and affordable pricing relative to what it was before means that a lot of the people are able to send satellites to space, or send more satellites to space than they could before. That includes governments which do not have a full-fledged space program. And we have seen the example of that with Bangladesh launching their first satellite on a SpaceX rocket, for example, and so on. So that has been one of the, it's the combination of all of these things that have disrupted the space industry as far as rockets are concerned.
And what do you think is the role of NASA in getting SpaceX to where it is today? I mean, NASA has really backed SpaceX in launching projects to space. So what is the role of NASA particularly in getting where SpaceX is today?
It has been quintessential, to say the least, because back when SpaceX started testing their first rocket, Falcon 1, they failed 3 times, I think, and then that's okay. I mean, it was a phenomenon. It was a massive undertaking for sure. But that is the point where NASA showed trust in SpaceX and allotted them a contract to send supplies to the International Space Station for astronauts on board their rocket, on board their own developed capsule. So NASA showed trust in SpaceX back then and effectively funded them to go ahead and perfect their rockets, and now we know what the Falcon 9 is capable of. So NASA has clearly been very important in making SpaceX what it is today, and it continues to do so with astronauts launching on SpaceX's rockets and so on. So the role of NASA is central to this relationship, and it is going to continue further as we saw the news last month that SpaceX has been selected as one of the candidates to launch NASA astronauts to the moon in this decade as well. So that relationship is only going to go further. And there are other examples. For example, 3 years ago, I think NASA launched its space telescope on board SpaceX's Falcon 9 rocket, which is kind of interesting to note because it's a private rocket, and this is the first time a science mission is going on a private rocket. So that's also very interesting to know for a person like me who is into science.
Yeah, it's exciting stuff. So moving on, we're talking about space here, but this is not where space has caught on. This is not the first time that we are seeing launches. We put a human on moon before. That was 50 years back, 1970s. Why has it taken us another 50 years to get this level of excitement back? And what is the reason why, we've been so slow in growing the space industry? Like we, at that pace, right? We by now should have put a human on Mars. So what's the hold up?
So yeah, that's what I've been dabbling with a lot growing up when interested in space exploration and wanting to know about what happened in the past and so on. So it's kind of a bummer. If you were living in the 1960s and the kind of science fiction that was also being put out alongside the actual missions happening, one would assume in the 1960s and also the initial 70s that by 2000 you would have a human on Mars, and you would also venture beyond to Jupiter, which is what 2001 A Space Odyssey was all about, and so on. So there were dreams that people had back then, and the dreams were there because it was realistic. It seemed realistic at the time given the sheer progress. However, we must acknowledge that the role that politics plays into all of this, because many people don't realize that space exploration and the space industry is not very different from any other industry in the sense that it is also politically intertwined. And since the Soviet Union failed in landing humans on the moon as well, the space race did not quite continue as it could have if that had happened. So the incentive to push further went away when NASA won the race to the moon once and for all. So I think that has been central to the general stagnation that we have observed. I mean, this is not to say that a lot of good missions haven't happened since then. I mean, Cassini comes to mind, for example, phenomenal mission. I'm a huge fan, but in general, overall, the stagnation is clear, and I don't think anyone would disagree. So political motives have been mostly to blame.
We all know how deeply intertwined politics and business is. I mean, I did a show last week about geo platforms, and I don't want to name anyone, but we know how deeply, the political connections run. So yeah, definitely politics influences business. But I think SpaceX and Elon Musk have done a fantastic job in getting the excitement back into the space industry. So how influential was SpaceX and Elon Musk in, generating this excitement in the space industry?
So first and foremost, I think just doing something like landing an orbital class rocket, which is like just huge, and just landing that entire thing autonomously back on Earth, and which is something no one has ever truly done before, is just mind-blowing and truly sci-fi-esque, and I don't think anyone would ever disagree to that period. And the first time they did that, and I was watching from home, it was just, too exciting, and I really remember that day, and it was just mind-boggling to see that happen in real life. So that's one thing. But the other thing is also, we are living in the 21st century where, while space exploration quite hasn't progressed as we had hoped it to, something else has, which is IT and the digital infrastructure that we have. So we have social media, we have super connectivity across the world, and we can watch a rocket launch from home and so on. So SpaceX has done something really good, which I don't think many people have or anyone else has, which is to give real high quality footage of the entire launch through and through, and have various viewing angles, and even watch the booster land on its feet autonomously, which is just amazing. So combining all of these things, they have used digital infrastructure to their advantage, and I think that more people should do that. Cuff ISRO. So I think that's something people should take note of, and everyone should be doing that, because it excites the current generation to do more and push for more. And I think if we do things right, and if SpaceX continues on this path, we can have an even better human landing that we had in 1969.
Definitely. This is an exciting time to live in, I would say. Eliminating the space component from it, what are the business opportunities that open up once you launch into space, or no? What are the business opportunities or the commercial activities that businesses could do in space?
So there's quite a few things. I'll start with the one which people may be most familiar with, which is, a lot of the times you get your TV from satellites. So that is definitely one thing. But there's also communication satellites, which are central to our current modern way of living, and Uber would completely fail if GPS satellites did not do their job, for example. So there are some traditional markets in which the space industry has anyway been, but there's also things like, there's a company called Planet Labs, and what they essentially do is image the Earth at high quality and sell the imagery data to companies like Google, for example, which uses it in their maps, so which we all know and love. And so that's another example of commercialization in space sector. And then there's of course SpaceX, which SpaceX charges companies and countries to launch their satellites on top of their rockets. So that's another thing that can be done. And apart from that, there's an upcoming market for although it's quite distant, but it's going to happen, which is sending your scientific instruments on the moon, for example. So NASA has recently selected companies to send their scientific instruments on the landers that companies built to the moon. So a commercial company will build a lunar lander, and NASA will pay them to send their instruments to the moon. So even science can happen commercially in the future. And of course we discussed the example of sending astronauts to the space station, where SpaceX gets $55 million per seat from NASA. So there's quite a few things that you can do, and as technologies improve in the future, we may even think about asteroid mining and things like that, but we are not quite there yet.
Asteroid mining does sound appealing to me, I would say. So we've spoken about SpaceX. What are the other players, other private players in the industry? Why haven't they been able to catch up to SpaceX? Everyone is talking about SpaceX. I'm sure there are other private competitors that are, competing with SpaceX. So why are they so behind SpaceX? What is SpaceX doing differently? What is the moat that SpaceX has?
So I'll answer it in a different way. So for the first thing is that there's not really a company which is quite like SpaceX. So to give an analog, I don't think there's quite any company which is like Apple, for example, which does a full vertical integration of their technology. So SpaceX's ambitions are not quite matched by anyone else's. So that's one thing. However, there are some areas where there are overlaps. So, for example, Blue Origin, which is a company founded by Jeff Bezos. So, Blue Origin also won a NASA contract along with SpaceX, an initial contract to build a lunar lander, which will land on the moon and which will carry NASA astronauts in it. So, in that sense, they are directly competing with SpaceX. And Blue Origin is also building a rocket of their own, which is going to be more powerful than the Falcon 9, although less powerful than SpaceX's upcoming Starship rocket. So this rocket, which they call New Glenn, it will be about twice as powerful as the Falcon 9, and it will be so huge at the top that it can carry 2 full-scale communication satellites in its fairing, which is not something others have been able to do so far. So there are some unique things to that. And then there are other companies which are not even trying to compete with SpaceX simply because they don't have to. So for example, there's Rocket Lab, which is a company which builds really small rockets, and the goal is to launch small satellites which cannot launch on a larger rocket, because a small satellite paying the cost of an entire large rocket doesn't make any sense. And plus, sometimes these small satellites, which are often called CubeSats, they need dedicated orbits which large rockets cannot give them. So companies like Rocket Lab are serving the CubeSat market dedicatedly. And CubeSats are something that even students in universities, and even in India, are building CubeSats today, because a CubeSat is much cheaper to build. And the most important thing about CubeSats is that the miniaturization of technology with time, it plays into their advantage. So for example, if you take our phone, a phone can do today 10 things which devices 10 to 20 years ago, individual devices were needed to do those at the time, and now one single phone can do that because of the miniaturization of technology. So similarly, CubeSats represent miniaturization of space technology, and with time their capabilities are increasing. So that is the up and coming market that Rocket Lab is trying to cater to, and it doesn't quite have a competition yet, and things like that. And of course we discussed Planet Labs, which is completely doing a different thing. So but in a sense, SpaceX doesn't really have a competitor per se. It has competition in specific areas, but not quite all of it.
Alright, so to wrap this up, I will ask you a question that I have been wondering for a long time, and I think the listeners also want to know that what is the vision of Elon Musk? I know he's a visionary, he's a guy who plans a lot of things, he wants to disrupt everything that he gets into, but what is his ultimate vision when it comes to space?
So I think I can only speak for the vision that he has publicly spoken about. So what he says publicly is that he wants to establish a human colony on Mars. And the reason for that is really simple, and I think everyone agrees with him on that, is that, regardless of the efforts to make Earth better, at some point the Earth is not going to last. Life on Earth is not going to last, because we can take the example of dinosaurs, for example. The dinosaurs never saw the asteroid coming, and with our science and technology today we can. And we can also make technology in principle that can avoid an asteroid from colliding with Earth. But either way, we can tell an asteroid is coming. And even if we assume that we are able to mitigate the effect of an head-on asteroid collision, things don't stop there. The sun is getting bigger and brighter by the day. So at some point, the earth will not be habitable because the temperatures will simply shoot up beyond a point where life is possible. And at that point, at least if not before, you would have to move to Mars or further away. And that is assuming that we don't kill ourselves in a World War III or something like that. So that is one thing. So the idea is really simple. Just diversify your homes, just like you would diversify your investment. It just makes sense because you don't want all your eggs in one basket. It just makes sense. And in fact, I'm pretty sure that once you have a colony on Mars, people will root for expanding into the solar system. And I just have a great recommendation here, just taking a digress here, which is, there's a show called The Expanse on Amazon Prime. The story is set in the 23rd century, where humans have colonized the solar system already, and then a lot of interesting things play out. Not to spoil it for you, so just watch that. So anyway, so I think the idea is really simple. You want to live, and Earth is not here forever. So we should definitely make efforts to make Earth better, but at the same time, it is even more important to survive. So
I'm gonna watch this show. I'm definitely gonna use my Amazon Prime subscription more often now. There is stuff you can watch on Amazon Prime. This is not the key takeaway here, but definitely go watch this.
And in order to fulfill his vision and see a human colony on Mars, SpaceX has been building with a rapid pace their new rocket, an upcoming rocket, which is called Starship. And a lot of the people in the space industry, myself included, have been following closely the phenomenal pace at which they are making progress on a huge rocket like Starship. So just to give you a sense of scale, it is going to be as or even more powerful than the rocket that sent humans to the moon, which is the most powerful rocket in history period to date. So Starship is something to look forward to, and Elon Musk and SpaceX for that matter are putting all of their bets on Starship. And if everything goes smooth, you may actually see Starship land humans on the moon first in this decade itself. To that end, we talked about how NASA has selected SpaceX as part of their initial contract to send humans to the moon on the Starship. So that's the first step. And after that, Starship will be used to send humans to Mars as well. And it is central to Musk's plan of colonizing Mars. So it's a quite exciting time to live in. And I can bet you that this is going to be way more exciting than the first human landings on the moon were.
If that happens, then I'm sure that SpaceX can finally justify its $36 billion valuation. So yeah, I'm looking forward to it. And thank you, Jatin, for hopping on today's show. It was great to have you. Guys, if you want to catch more stuff from Jatin, you can visit his website. It will be in the description. It's called jatin.space. People on the show may have certain recommendations to buy or sell securities, so don't buy or sell on what you hear. Do your own research before you take any decision. Our email address is thebazaarpodcast@gmail.com. If you have any questions, we'd love to answer all of them. Also, do let us know what you think of the show. It means a lot, your feedback helps us grow the show and include more interesting parts into the shows. So see you until the next time.